afternoon. You're watching News 18 Global with me, Ridhima Bhatnagar. Our top focus. Russia's launched its biggest swarm of drones for months against Ukraine on the eve of Russia's Victory Day, striking the capital Kyiv and the Black Sea city of Odessa and shelling other regions. Now, according to Kyiv's mayor, Russia fired 60 Iranian-made kamikaze drones at Ukrainian targets, including 36 at the capital. All drones were shot down, but debris hit apartments and other buildings, including at least 5 people in Kyiv were injured. A food warehouse was also set on fire by the missile in the Black Sea city of Odessa, where 3 people were injured. Air raid alerts blared over roughly two-thirds of Ukraine for hours. But today, thousands of people lined the streets of Moscow's Red Square as part of Russia's annual Victory Day parade, when the Kremlin displayed a front of military might and grandeur, contrasting with its faltering military campaign on the front lines in Ukraine. The Moscow parade, remember, is an exhibition of patriotism, marking the Soviet Union's role in defeating Nazi Germany in World War II. It was on the 8th of May 1945, May 9 in Moscow's time zone, that Germany signed its instrument of surrender in Berlin, ending the fighting in Europe. The USSR suffered the most casualties of any nation. About 27 million soldiers and civilians died. So what does the celebration as far as the Victory Day parade is concerned? What does this mean as far as the future of the war is concerned? Let's also now bring in our guest. We have Ben Aris, Editor-in-Chief at BNE, who's been kind enough to take out the time and join us this afternoon. Ben, we appreciate you taking out the time and joining us here. First things first, let's first talk about the grandeur as far as the Victory Day parade is concerned. Even last week, when Moscow had made the allegations against Ukraine in what they saw was an alleged assassination attempt against Putin, they were sure of one thing, that none of this will impact the Victory Day parade. What is the message that Russia is sending out with the grandeur of the Victory Day parade?
Well, it comes up every year. It's a very important event in the political calendar of Russia that it's hard to overemphasize. Victory that the Russian won in the Second World War. They see as a Russian victory over Nazis. And Putin said specifically in his speech just now on Red Square that the West has forgotten to Putin about Russia's role in defeating Nazi Germany, and it really was a Russian victory. Instead, they lost about 27 million people by the Soviets, and the rest of the Allies together was main allies in the West. But it's symbolic. I mean, this whole day is pregnant with symbols. And it's a message that's going to play extremely well to the Russian population, because every family in Russia is a victim. Everybody lost someone. And normally there's what's called the immortal parade, where everyone carries pictures of their family members that died. Although this year it was cancelled. I think the Kremlin was afraid that people would be carrying pictures of those who have died in Ukraine, of which there's at least 100,000. So that was put off. But because of the drone attacks last week, security was extremely tight. Red Square has been closed off for about a month. Nothing's been allowed. There are checkpoints all over the city, and the parade itself was much smaller than tanks. Big parade of missiles, that didn't happen. And the crowd on the square is much smaller as well. So it's Putin standing there, and it's an act of defiance in the face of the terrorist attack of drones, as far as the Kremlin is concerned, and that they're having it anyway. He's out in the open.
Issue in trying to get your audio right. I'll just ask the team to try and re-establish that connection with you, and we'll just continue the conversation. But as we said, there have been drone strikes as far as Russia is concerned on Ukraine, which has led to a number of people being injured as well. Let's take a ground report, and then we'll try and continue this conversation.
Russia's military hit Ukrainian cities with its largest drone swarm attack in months on Monday, just a day before Victory Day, a celebration of the Soviet triumph over Nazi Germany in 1945, and the most important day in the Russian calendar under President Vladimir Putin. The drone swarm is the latest in a renewed go. This is damage from the strikes done to apartment blocks in Kyiv. A resident, Volodymyr, said his wife and child would have slept right there. According to Mayor Vitaly Klitschko, Russia fired 60 Iranian-made kamikaze drones at targets in Ukraine. 36 targeted the capital, all of which were shot down, he said.
Right now we're in an apartment, one of the buildings. Today was one of the massive attack to our hometown. 5 people was taken injuries, 2 people right now in hospitals, but nobody is died. It's very important.
In Bakhmut, the Ukrainian government says Russian forces appear to be making a final push, hoping to capture it ahead of the May 9th holiday and deliver the only prize for Putin in a costly winter offensive. The battle for the besieged city has been one of the bloodiest of the 14-month war. The medics aboard this makeshift ambulance say they retrieved 6 wounded soldiers Monday, most of them from Bakhmut. As the wounded are taken from the front lines, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky further cemented Ukraine's break with its Soviet past. Speaking to the nation on a hill overlooking Kyiv, Zelensky said the old evil had returned, this time waged by a modern Russia. Zelensky said he had submitted a bill to Parliament officially making May 8th a day of remembrance and victory, while May 9th, Russia's Victory Day, would become Europe Day.
And we'll try and connect with Ben Aris once again. Ben, apologies for the last time around. We actually couldn't hear you very clearly. But I also want to understand from you the kind of events that have happened before this Victory Day parade. You had Russia launching its biggest swarm of drones for months against Ukraine. That alleged allegation of an assassination attempt to the kind of drone attack, is the offensive that has already been increased multiple times by Russia only going to increase in days and weeks to come?
As I said, I think today is pregnant with symbolism, and the drone attacks against the Kremlin last week, it was either by the Ukrainians, and Ukrainians have been flying drones into Russia because they're expected to mount a counteroffensive any day now. It could come, I mean, now the ground is drying up. And part of that strategy seems to be to take the fight to Russia and target infrastructure and fuel supplies inside Russia. So it's very possible that the strike against the Kremlin was Ukrainian. However, there's a lot of analysts that have been speculating that it was actually organized by the FSB, by the Russian security services, for political purposes, in order to shake up Russians who've got used to this war not really affecting them in daily life. And Russia's in the middle of a recruiting drive. And so here we have like an attack on the Kremlin last week, and now this defiant Putin standing on Red Square in front of his army, reminding everybody that Russia played a key role in the Second World War, what they call the Great Patriotic War, in defeating the Nazis. And he's linked the special military operation, as he calls it, in Ukraine to the same fight, in so much as he's called the government in Kiev Nazis, and that he's trying to say that, look, we're basically fighting against fascism once more. And last time Russia was victorious, and we will be victorious this time as well. And as I say, that's a message that's going to play very well with the Russian public.
But I want to understand, ever since the war broke out, and that's the case in any war, it's also a war of narrative and optics as well. As far as the alleged assassination attempt and the allegation that came from Russia, Ukraine has said we have nothing to do with it. This is just Russia. It's a frustrated Russia that's trying to meddle as far as the narrative war is concerned. Even the counteroffensive of Ukraine has increased. How do you see this impacting the war in the weeks to come, specifically as far as the preparedness of Ukraine is concerned?
Well, we're expecting this counteroffensive. And as you say, it's a war of words. I mean, unlike the Second World War, this is not such an existential fight as far as the Russians are concerned. It is for the Ukraine, or Ukraine, I should say. However, it's because Ukraine has seen its industry largely destroyed. It's entirely dependent on the West for supplies. And so for Zelensky, the message, the keeping the story in the top of the agenda of keeping support for his campaign and the billions of dollars that this is costing the West is extremely important. And so this counteroffensive has, undue significance in so much as if it fails, then it's likely that West will turn around and say, all right, enough's enough, and that we're going to cut Ukraine off from its support, and there has to be a negotiated. And if it's successful, then that will keep the momentum going and possibly cause Putin some real problems, politically destabilize him. If, great, powerful Russia is seen to be defeated by the puny Ukraine, then that's going to have repercussions for him politically, and it could see his whole support base collapse. So everything's up in the air. I mean, this is going to be a key event, key battle in the whole war, because there's not much more that Russia can do. I mean, it's thrown everything at Ukraine, and it's not doing very well.
I quickly also want to understand another aspect from you, Ben. Even as Ukraine was denying that we had nothing to do as far as that alleged attack on Kremlin was concerned, Russia then made another allegation, and they said actually all of this was hatched because of the United States, and Ukraine only did what it was asked to do. Do you think there's another narrative that is being peddled by Russia to try and ensure that the West cuts off all the aid that is being given to Ukraine?
Well, there's an element of truth to that, because the Americans have been supplying real-time intelligence to Ukraine using their satellites. And it's remarkable. I mean, you watch the footage from the battlefield, that Ukrainians are extremely well informed about where, the Russians have positioned their supplies, where they position their tanks, and they're using these highly accurate HIMARS missiles that have been supplied by Americans to take them out. And specifically, Russia's lost a lot of generals because Ukrainians know precisely where the command posts are, and they have these accurate missiles, and so they can hit them. I mean, down to the point where they've hit hotels where FSB agents have been sleeping, and specifically taken out those people. On the other hand, to a large extent, Zelensky's fighting his own war. He's making his own decisions, and he has the American help. But the extent that the war is being directed by the US, I'm not sure that's true. Certainly, they're getting help. However, you have to understand the propaganda here is that Putin is selling this war to the Russians that NATO has attacked Russia, not Ukraine, and that they're fighting a war against the Americans. Yeah. And so these allegations come up, and again, it plays very well with the Russian public. You talk to any Russian, and they say, yeah, we're at war with NATO. It's just a proxy war being fought through Ukraine, and they are tools. Like I say, it's complicated because there's an element of truth to it.
Yeah, very interesting point that you're making. It's not a war against Ukraine, but a narrative war as far as the NATO is concerned. Lastly, Ben, I want to understand, where do you see this war headed? For how long do you think either of the sides can sustain it? Because at the end of the day, there is a cost attached to the war for either sides. There is a human cost and there is a financial cost as well.
Yeah, I mean, from the European perspective, they want it to stop. I mean, this is costing Europe an enormous amount of money, trillions of euros, because of the inflation, because of the energy problems, deindustrialization that's going on here in Germany, because factories no longer have gas, they can't make things like fertilizer. For the Americans, which has a much more autonomous economy, is not so dependent on imports, they can keep this up as long as they want. And for the Americans, the longer it goes on, the more depleted the Russian military is, and that's to their advantage. But I think, as I said, we're in a crucial stage now. It is possible. The Americans have said quite clearly, I think, that they want to see a negotiated end to this war. That probably involves Ukraine giving up some territory. But there's a possibility if this counter-offensive is successful and then Putin's on his back foot, that he could be willing to do peace. So there is a chance that we'll see peace talks at least by the end of this summer. Otherwise, it could drag on for years.
Okay.